The humid air of Lagos carried a deceptive calm that morning. Jonathan Pierce had just returned from Europe, determined to invest in the city of his birth. For years, he had built a name for himself in Berlin, managing a logistics firm and supporting his community abroad. But his dream was never to remain overseas forever. His heart belonged in Nigeria. Friends and relatives admired his ambition. Jonathan spoke often about real estate development, about providing jobs and reshaping abandoned plots into homes. He was described as calm, approachable, yet driven by a fire that came from wanting to give back. On the morning of May 3, 2025, Jonathan drove into Ikorodu with the sun beaming through his windshield. He thought he was headed to a routine land inspection. He had no idea he was driving into an ambush, an event that would unravel into one of the most shocking crimes Lagos had ever seen. The call came just after 10 a.m. "Sir, we have a boundary flare-up," said Greg Lawson, Jonathan's site supervisor. He sounded urgent but respectful, the way he always did. The project sat on the outskirts of Ypres, quiet roads, scrub grass, and the promise of gated homes one day called Sunrise Residences. Greg insisted a neighboring family had moved a fence line overnight and tempers were rising. "If we don't handle it now, they'll block our access," he warned. Jonathan glanced at the folder on his desk, title documents, architectural sketches, cash for contractor deposits, and slid everything into a leather satchel. He texted his cousin that he'd be back by evening, grabbed his keys, and headed for the SUV. He didn't know Greg had already assembled 4 men at dawn. He didn't know a shallow grave yawned behind a cluster of young palms, the soil recently turned, the plan rehearsed. He only knew he wanted to build. Across Lagos that week, another story boiled through group chats, a man accused of assaulting his wife just 4 days after she delivered their child. It was his own sister, Emily, who called the police, voice shaking as she watched the scene unfold. The new mother's mum, visiting for a mugwo, stood stunned and weeping. Rumors sprinted ahead of facts. Some claimed the woman had died. But careful reporters found she was alive, fighting, slowly stabilizing in hospital care. The suspect was cuffed and led away as neighbors filmed from balconies. The case became a mirror reflecting how quickly love can sour into violence and how essential it is to walk away before words turn into wounds. In living rooms and on radio call-ins, people argued, mourned, and prayed. Meanwhile, in the wide blue open beyond Lekki and Oja, Jonathan Pierce drove on, steering toward Ypres, toward a meeting he thought would save time. Traffic thinned past Sangotedo, the sky opened into bright Lagos noon. Jonathan rehearsed talking points, ensure the beacon coordinates matched survey maps, calm nerves with documentation, offer a token for temporary access if needed. His phone buzzed with a news alert about the assault case. He skimmed it at a light and felt the familiar ache of our unpredictable city, joy and danger braided together. He silenced the phone. Greg called again, "Sir, park by the cashew trees. I'm waiting." When Jonathan turned off the expressway, the road narrowed to sand and stone. A goat wandered through tall grass, a distant generator coughed. Greg waved from shade, genial as ever. He led Jonathan down a narrow path to the disputed pegs. The breeze carried the smell of rain on hot dust. Jonathan stepped carefully over roots, listening as Greg explained setbacks and frontage. He didn't see the men ease from cover. He didn't turn in time. The first blow landed behind his right ear, a heavy, stunning strike that fractured thought and balance in one brutal instant. Jonathan stumbled to his knees, breath punching from his chest as the folder of documents slid from his hand. Another blow thudded against his shoulder. His vision stuttered. "Why?" he managed, the word as thin as the wind. No one answered. Boots scuffed, metal rasped, commands hissed. Greg's face hardened into something Jonathan had never seen, calculation stripped of conscience. The men worked with a grim, practiced silence. He tried to rise, a hammer caught his temple, and the world rang like struck iron. He reached for the folder, for anything that felt like purpose or proof. A hand wrenched his wrist away. In those last lucid seconds, Jonathan thought of foundations, of houses, of families, of the way a city is built brick by honest brick. Then everything narrowed, and the light receded. They had prepared the grave before sunrise, quick, shallow, masked by fronds and fallen leaves. Method replaced mercy. They moved efficiently, The way men move when they think the world is a ledger and every sin can be balanced by stolen profit. The satchel was emptied. Documents, cash, phone. The SUV fob weighed cool in a palm. A machete flashed, orders snapped short, the scene turned colder than the shade itself. When it was done, soil thumped back into place, pressed and patted until the ground looked almost ordinary again. One man sketched spirals with a stick, disguising scuffs. Another wiped the hammer with a rag. Greg checked his watch. Birds complained in the canopy, the generator far off coughed again. They locked the site hut, climbed into Jonathan's SUV, and rolled toward the road as if leaving a routine inspection. Behind them lay a silence that would not stay buried for long. Hubris writes in sloppy ink. Instead of vanishing, Greg decided to realize value. He drove the SUV toward Ohodu's Burger Auto Market, fast talk, faster deals, papers shuffled like playing cards. But paperwork has a memory, and vehicle histories leave trails. A sharp-eyed dealer noticed nervous tics. Greg wouldn't sit, kept glancing at the gate, asked to be paid in scattered transfers. "Why's the logbook so new?" the dealer asked, stalling as he texted a police contact. Minutes stretched. Outside, traffic burred. Greg insisted he had another buyer. The dealer smiled, nodded, stalled some more. A VIO patrol rolled past the gate. The dealer waved as if greeting friends. Officers stepped inside casually, asking about chassis numbers and authentication. Greg tried to laugh it off, then proposed a lower price. He failed to notice two plainclothes officers drift to either side of him, or the way the room's air changed temperature. The detention was quiet and precise. At the station, the questions began: simple: ownership, provenance, proof. When answers contradicted, the room settled into a colder rhythm. A senior investigator slid photos of Jonathan across the table, entry stamps, corporate filings, the land survey in Ypres. "Where is he?" Silence frayed. Greg gulped water, his hands trembled. 40 minutes later, the dam cracked. He spoke in starts, then sentences, then a flood of detail: the early morning spadework, the path by the cashews, the hammer. He named his 4 accomplices: Marcus, Leo, Daniel, Chris, and signed an initial statement. By dusk, a convoy rolled toward Ypres, headlights stitching the road. At the site, officers stepped from the vehicles into cicada noise. They followed Greg through brush to the disguised patch of soil. Shovels bit earth. The night drew in its breath. When the ground gave up its secret, even the insects seemed to pause and listen. News travels faster than sirens. By morning, justice for Jonathan pulsed across timelines. Radio hosts interrupted playlists to cover the case. In Berlin, where Jonathan had lived for years, friends posted photos from community events, him pouring jollof at fundraisers, smiling as he helped new arrivals find housing. "Brother, you came home to build," one message read. "How did it end like this?" In Lagos, neighbors lined the street near his family's house with candles in plastic cups, their flames trembling in the sea breeze. At a small church in Ikorodu, the pastor spoke softly about builders and walls, about those who enter by the gate and those who climb over to steal and kill. A cousin held Jonathan's passport like a fragile relic. Strangers sent money toward funeral plans and legal support. Grief and rage braided tight, demanding not only arrests but accountability that did not dissolve at the courthouse steps. Detectives moved swiftly on accomplices, scooping Marcus at a beer joint in Abulegba, Daniel near a cousin's kiosk in Bador, and Chris dozing in a friend's one-room in Awayaya. Leo tried to slip toward Augun State but ran into a checkpoint that already had his photo. By evening, all 5 suspects were in custody. The charge sheet read like a hammer: premeditated murder, conspiracy, theft, obstruction. At a press briefing, the police commissioner promised transparency, flanked by weary officers and a stack of exhibits, tools recovered, the satchel, the altered plate frame. Journalists pressed about motive. The investigators pointed to greed and a dispute disguised as necessity. The DPP signaled intention to pursue the maximum penalty. In the street outside, vendors paused their sales of bottled water and gala to film on their phones. Someone whispered, "Make DEM no twistem tomorrow." Another answered, "This one, ego reach judgment." Beneath Lagos skyline lies a shadow economy of land, forged surveys, disputed beacons, Omo-Onal tolls, and insiders who turn guard into wolf. Jonathan's case cracked the door on that underbelly. Advocacy groups called for a land rights audit in peri-urban zones, from Ypres Sands to Ibijaleki Scrub, where developments sprout faster than governance. A roundtable on TV argued for digital registries, tougher trespass penalties, and investor protection protocols, vetted supervisors, GPS-tracked inspections, panic alert check-ins. Returnees bring capital and belief, a lawyer said. If belief keeps getting punished, capital will stay away. Urban planners urged community benefit compacts so locals feel earned inclusion, not exclusion ripe for sabotage. The message was simple: the cost of doing nothing dwarfs the cost of reform. Jonathan's name threaded every policy memo like a watermark, proof that headlines fade but structural change must remain. In the family compound, grief moved with quiet purpose. Jonathan's sister drafted plans for the Pierce Foundation, scholarships for construction apprenticeships, microgrants for ethical surveyors, seed funds for honest site security firms. His mother insisted the first award be named Builder's Heart. The architect who'd drawn Sunrise Residences offered to release the designs pro bono to the foundation if a reputable developer would build with transparent oversight. A coalition of diaspora professionals reached out from Berlin and London, promising audits and fundraising. At night, cousins replayed voice notes where Jonathan laughed about drainage and roof pitches, about making houses that don't leak when life does. It felt impossible to separate pain from purpose, but they tried. On the seventh evening, the pastor prayed, "Lord, redeem what hands of violence tried to cancel." When he said Amen, the room held still, as if listening for a brick to settle in a new wall. The other case, the new mother brutalized days after delivery, returned to court for mention. She was alive, recovering, a slow climb through pain that medicine and quiet love were easing. Emily, the sister-in-law who made the call, testified about shock and duty. Family means protecting the vulnerable, even from our own. The defendant stared at the floor while advocates outside held placards against domestic violence. A nurse from the ward spoke about postpartum bodies and the sanctity of healing. The magistrate reminded the gallery to keep order, the matter would proceed. On radio, counselors urged couples to pause and cool off, to leave the room when tempers rise. "You can't unsay a slap," one host said. "Choose the door over the fist." In a city wrestling with too many forms of harm, the stories bent toward the same plea: let love build, let anger leave. Jonathan's case reached arraignment. Then trial. Courtroom benches filled early with neighbors, journalists, and men in office shirts who'd taken casual leave to watch justice wear its robe. The prosecution laid out a chain: phone pings placing Greg at the site pre-dawn, shovel soil under his nails, CCTV of Jonathan's SUV passing 2 checkpoints, bank queries about sudden transfers. Forensics matched impact patterns to the recovered hammer, GPS photos pinned the cashew shade clearing. The defense flailed at process, chain of custody, supposed coercion, but Greg's taped statement echoed in the room like iron on anvil. When the court adjourned, the crowd spilled into the compound, heat waves wobbling over the paving stones. "Makey no drag," a woman murmured, fanning herself. "Justice we slow day pain twice." The judge set a brisk schedule, warning counsel against delay tactics. Inside, exhibits waited in labeled envelopes, patient as truth itself. Lagos kept moving, Danfo zigzagging, markets singing, tides rolling in at Tarkwa Bay, yet both cases refused to slip from the city's mind. Jonathan Pierce, who came home to build, whose blueprints promised light. And the young mother who lived, whose survival promised warning. 2 stories braided into one lesson: betrayals can hide in friendly faces, tempers can topple homes, truth, though buried, refuses to stay down. Activists pressed for land reform and survivor support. The Pierce Foundation scheduled its first apprenticeship intake. In the courthouse, the trial pressed on toward a verdict that would write itself into memory. And as people shared candles, links, and prayers, a sentence moved from mouth to mouth like a vow: no matter how deep a grave is dug, the truth will find the surface, and when it does, may justice rise with it, steady as a wall-built brick upon honest brick. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel and turn on the notifications bell so that you will be the first to get the notice for the next video. Thanks and God bless.